Chapter 13, The Three Sleepers. The wind never failed, but it grew gentler every day, till at length the waves were little more than ripples, and the ship glided on hour after hour, almost as if they were sailing on a lake. And every night they saw that there rose in the east new constellations which no one had ever seen in Narnia, and perhaps, as Lucy thought with a mixture of joy and fear, no living eye had seen at all. Those new stars were big and bright, and the nights were warm. Most of them slept on deck and talked far into the night, or hung over the ship's side watching the luminous dance of the foam thrown up by their bows. On an evening of startling beauty, when the sunset behind them was so crimson and purple and widely spread that the very sky itself seemed to have grown larger, they came in sight of land on their starboard bow. It came slowly nearer, and the light behind them made it look as if the capes and headlands of this new country were all on fire. But presently they were sailing along its coast, and its western cape now rose up astern of them, black against the red sky and sharp as if it was cut out of cardboard. And then they could see better what this country was like. It had no mountains, but many gentle hills with slopes like pillows. An attractive smell came from it, what Lucy called a dim purple kind of smell, which Edmund said and Rintz thought was rot. But Caspian said, I know what you mean. They sailed on a good way, past point after point, hoping to find a nice deep harbor, but had to content themselves in the end with a wide and shallow bay. Though it had seemed calm out at sea, there was, of course, surf breaking in the sand, and they could not bring the Dawn Treader as far in as they would have liked. They dropped anchor a good way from the beach and had a wet and tumbling land in the boat. The Lord Roop remained on board the Dawn Treader. He wished to see no more islands. All the time that they remained in this country, the sound of the long breakers was in their ears. Two men were left to guard the boat, and Caspian led the others inland, but not far because it was too late for exploring, and the light would soon go. But there was no need to go far to find an adventure. The level valley, which lay at the head of the bay, showed no road or track or other sign of habitation. Underfoot was fine springy turf, dotted here and there with a low bushy growth, which Edmund and Lucy took for heather. Eustace, who was really rather good at botany, said it wasn't, and he was probably right, but it was something of very much the same kind. When they had gone less than a bow shot from the shore, Drinian said, Look, what's that? And everyone stopped. Are they great trees? Said Caspian. Towers, I think, said Eustace. It might be giants, said Edmund in a lower voice. The way to find out is to go right in among them, said Reepicheep, drawing his sword and pattering off ahead of everyone else. I think it's a ruin, said Lucy, when they had got a good deal nearer, and her guess was the best so far. What they now saw was a wide oblong space flagged with smooth stones and surrounded by gray pillars, but unroofed. And from end to end, it ran a long table laid with a rich crimson cloth that came down nearly to the pavement. At either side of it were many chairs of stone, richly carved and with silken cushions upon the seats. But on the table itself, there was set out such a banquet as had never been seen, not even when Peter the High King kept his court at Cair Paravel. There were turkeys and geese and peacocks. There were boars' heads and sides of venison. There were pies shaped like ships under full sail, or like dragons and elephants. There were ice puddings and bright lobsters and gleaming salmon. There were nuts and grapes, pineapples and peaches, pomegranates and melons, and tomatoes. There were flagons of gold and silver and curiously wrought glass, and the smell of the fruit and the wine blew towards them like a promise of all happiness. I say, said Lucy. They came nearer and nearer, all very quietly. But where are the guests? Asked Eustace. We can provide that, sir, said Rince. Look, said Edmund sharply. They were actually within the pillars now and standing on the pavement. Everyone looked where Edmund had pointed. The chairs were not all empty. At the head of the table and in the two places beside it, there was something, or possibly three somethings. What are those? Asked Lucy in a whisper. It looks like three beavers sitting on the table. Or a huge bird's nest, said Edmund. It looks more like a haystack to me, said Caspian. Reepicheep ran forward, jumped on a chair, and thence onto the table, and ran along it, threading his way as nimbly as a dancer between jeweled cups and pyramids of fruit and ivory salt cellars. He ran right up to the mysterious gray mass at the end, peered, touched, and then called out, These will not fight, I think. Everyone now came close and saw that what sat in those three chairs was three men, though hard to recognize as men till you looked closely. Their hair, which was gray, had grown over their eyes till it almost concealed their faces, and their beards had grown over the table, climbing round and entwining plates and goblets as brambles entwine a fence, until all mixed in one great mat of hair. They flowed over the edge and lay down to the floor, and from their heads the hair hung over the backs of their chairs, so that they were wholly hidden. In fact, the three men were nearly all hair. Dead? Said Caspian. I think not, sire, said Reepicheep, lifting one of their hands out of his tangle of hair in his two paws. This one is warm, and this pulse beats. This one too, and this, said Drinian. Why, they're only asleep, said Eustace. It's been a long sleep, though, said Edmund, to let their hair grow like this. It must be an enchanted sleep, said Lucy. I felt the moment we landed on this island that it was full of magic. Oh, do you think we have perhaps come here to break it? We can try, said Caspian, and began shaking the nearest of the three sleepers. For a moment, everyone thought he was going to be successful, for the man breathed hard and muttered, I'll go eastward no more. Out oars for Narnia. But he sank back almost at once into a yet deeper sleep than before. That is, his heavy head sagged a few inches lower towards the table, and all efforts to rouse him again were useless. With the second, it was much the same. Weren't born to live like animals. Get to the east while you've got a chance. Lands behind the sun. And sank down. And the third only said, Mustard, please. And slept hard. Outdoors for Narnia, eh? Said Drinian. Yes, said Caspian. You are right, Drinian. I think our quest is at an end. Let's look at their rings. Yes, these are their devices. This is the Lord Revilian. This is the Lord Argaz. And this, the Lord Mavramorn. But we can't wake them, said Lucy. What are we to do? Begging your majesty's pardons all, said Rince. But why not fall to while we're discussing it? We don't see a dinner like this every day. Not for your life, said Caspian. That's right, said several of the sailors. Too much magic about here. The sooner we're back on board, the better. Depends upon it, said Reepicheep. It was from eating this food that these three lords came by a 7-year sleep. I wouldn't touch it to save my life, said Drinian. The light's going uncommon quick, said Ranulph.
Back to the ship, muttered the men. I really think, said Edmund, they're right. We can decide what to do with the 3 sleepers tomorrow. We daren't eat the food, and there's no point in staying here for the night. The whole place smells of magic and danger. I am entirely of King Edmund's opinion, said Reepicheep, as far as concerns the ship's company in general, but I myself will sit at this table till sunrise. Why on earth? Said Eustace. Because, said the mouse, this is a very great adventure, and no danger seems to me so great as that of knowing when I get back to Narnia that I left a mystery behind me through fear. I'll stay with you, Reep, said Edmund. And I too, said Caspian. And me, said Lucy. And then Eustace volunteered also. This was very brave of him, because never having read of such things or even heard of them till he joined the Dawn Treader made it worse for him than for the others. I beseech your majesty, began Drinian. No, my lord, said Caspian. Your place is with the ship, and you have had a day's work while we 5 have idled. There was a lot of argument about this, but in the end, Caspian had his way. As the crew marched off to the shore in the gathering dusk, none of the 5 watchers, except perhaps Reepicheep, could avoid a cold feeling in the stomach. They took some time choosing their seats at the perilous table. Probably everyone had the same reason, but no one said it out loud, for it was really a rather nasty choice. One could hardly bear to sit all night next to those 3 terrible, hairy objects which, if not dead, were certainly not alive in the ordinary sense. On the other hand, to sit at the far end so that you would see them less and less as the night grew darker, and wouldn't know if they were moving, or perhaps wouldn't see them at all by about 2 o'clock. No, it was not to be thought of. So they sauntered round and round the table, saying, what about here? And, or perhaps a bit further on, or why not on this side? Till at last they settled down somewhere about the middle, but nearer to the sleepers than to the other end. It was about 10 by now and almost dark. Those strange new constellations burned in the east. Lucy would have liked it better if they had been the leopard and the ship and other old friends of the Narnian sky. They wrapped themselves in their sea cloaks and sat still and waited. At first, there was some attempt at talk, but it didn't come to much. And they sat, and all the time they heard the waves breaking on the beach. After hours that seemed like ages, there came a moment when they all knew they had been dozing a moment before, but were all suddenly wide awake. The stars were all in quite different positions from those they had last noticed. The sky was very black, except for the faintest possible grayness in the east. They were cold, though thirsty, and stiff, and none of them spoke because now at last something was happening. Before them, beyond the pillars, there was the slope of a low hill, and now a door opened in the hillside, and light appeared in the doorway, and a figure came out, and the door shut behind it. The figure carried a light, and this light was really all that they could see distinctly. It came slowly nearer and nearer, till at last it stood right at the table opposite to them. Now they could see that it was a tall girl, dressed in a single long garment of clear blue, which left her arms bare. She was bareheaded, and her yellow hair hung down her back. And when they looked at her, they thought they had never before known what beauty meant. The light which she had been carrying was a tall candle in a silver candlestick, which she now set upon the table. If there had been any wind off the sea earlier in the night, it must have died down by now, for the flame of the candle burned as straight and still as if it were in a room, with the windows shut and the curtains drawn.
Gold and silver on the table shone in its light. Lucy now noticed something lying lengthwise on the table, which had escaped her attention before. It was a knife of stone, sharp as steel, a cruel-looking, ancient-looking thing. No one had yet spoken a word. Then Reepicheep first, and Caspian next. They all rose to their feet because they felt that she was a great lady. Travelers who have come from far to Aslan's table, said the girl, why do you not eat and drink? Madam, said Caspian, we feared the food because we thought it had cast our friends into an enchanted sleep. They have never tasted it, she said. Please, said Lucy, what happened to them? 7 years ago, said the girl, they came here in a ship whose sails were rags and her timbers ready to fall apart. There were a few others with them, sailors, and when they came to this table, one said, here is the good place. Let us set sail and reef sail and row no longer, but sit down and end our days in peace. And the second said, no, let us re-embark and sail for Narnia and the West. It may be that Miraz is dead. But the third, who was a very masterful man, leapt up and said, no, by heaven, we are men and Telmarines, not brutes. What should we do but seek adventure after adventure? We have not long to live in any event. Let us spend what is left in seeking the unpeopled world behind the sunrise. And as they quarreled, he caught up the knife of stone which lies there on the table and would have fought with his comrades. But it is a thing not right for him to touch. And as his fingers closed upon the hilt, deep sleep fell upon all the three. Until the enchantment is undone, they will never wake. What is this knife of stone? Asked Eustace. Do none of you know it? Said the girl. I think, said Lucy, I've seen something like it before. It was a knife like it that the White Witch used when she killed Aslan at the stone table long ago. It was the same, said the girl, and it was brought here to be kept in honor while the world lasts. Edmund, who had been looking more and more uncomfortable for the last few minutes, now spoke. Look here, he said, I hope I'm not a coward about eating this food. I mean, and I'm sure I don't mean to be rude, but we have had a lot of queer adventures on this voyage of ours, and things aren't always what they seem. When I look in your face, I can't help believing all you say, but then that's just what might happen with a witch too. How are we to know you're a friend? You can't know, said the girl. You can only believe or not. After a moment's pause, Reepicheep's small voice was heard. Sire, he said to Caspian, of your courtesy, fill my cup with wine from that flagon. It is too big for me to lift. I will drink to the lady. Caspian obeyed, and the mouse, standing on the table, held up a golden cup between its tiny paws and said, Lady, I pledge you. Then it fell too on cold peacock, and in a short while everyone else followed its example. All were very hungry, and the meal, if not quite what you wanted for a very early breakfast, was excellent as a very late supper. Why is it called Aslan's table? Asked Lucy presently. It is set here by his bidding, said the girl, for those who come so far. Some call this island the world's end, for though you can sail further, this is the beginning of the end. But how does the food keep? Asked the practical Eustace. It is eaten and renewed every day, said the girl. This you will see. And what are we to do about the sleepers? Asked Caspian. In the world from which my friends come, here he nodded at Eustace and the Pevensies. They have a story of a prince or a king coming to a castle where all the people lay in an enchanted sleep. In that story, he could not dissolve the enchantment until he had kissed the princess. But here, said the girl, it is different. Here he cannot kiss the princess till he has dissolved the enchantment. Then, said Caspian, in the name of Aslan, show me how to set about that work at once. My father will teach you that, said the girl. Your father? Said everyone. Who is he? And where? Look, said the girl, turning round and pointing at the door in the hillside. They could see it more easily now, for while they had been talking, the stars had grown fainter, and great gaps of white light were appearing in the grayness of the eastern sky. Chapter 14, the beginning of the end of the world. Slowly, the door opened again, and out there came a figure as tall and straight as the girl's, but not so slender. It carried no light, but light seemed to come from it. As it came nearer, Lucy saw that it was like an old man. His silver beard came down to his bare feet in front, and his silver hair hung down to his heels behind, and his robe appeared to be made from the fleece of silver sheep. He looked so mild and grave that once more all the travelers rose to their feet and stood in silence. But the old man came on without speaking to the travelers and stood on the other side of the table opposite to his daughter. Then both of them held up their arms before them and turned to face the east. In that position, they began to sing. I wish I could write down the song, but no one who was present could remember it. Lucy said afterwards that it was high, almost shrill, but very beautiful. A cold kind of song, an early morning kind of song. And as they sang, the gray clouds lifted from the eastern sky, and the white patches grew bigger and bigger till it was all white, and the sea began to shine like silver. And long afterwards, but those two sang all the time, the east began to turn red, and at last, unclouded, the sun came up out of the sea, and its long level rays shot down the length of the table on the gold and silver and on the stone knife. Once or twice before, the Narnians had wondered whether the sun at its rising did not look bigger in these seas than it had looked at home. This time they were certain. There was no mistaking it, and the brightness of its rays on the dew and on the table was far beyond any morning brightness they had ever seen. And as Edmund said afterwards, there lots of things happened on that trip which sound more exciting. That moment was really the most exciting. For now they knew that they had truly come to the beginning of the end of the world. Then something seemed to be flying at them out of the very center of the rising sun, but of course one couldn't look steadily in that direction to make sure. But presently the air became full of voices, voices which took up the same song that the lady and her father were singing, but in far wilder tones and in a language which no one knew. And soon after that, the owners of these voices could be seen. They were birds, large and white, and they came by hundreds and thousands and alighted on everything, on the grass and the pavement, on the table, on your shoulders, your hands, and your head, till it looked as if heavy snow had fallen. For, like snow, they not only made everything white, but blurred and blunted all shapes. But Lucy, looking out from between the wings of the birds that covered her, saw one bird fly to the old man with something in its beak that looked like a little fruit. unless it was a little live coal, which it might have been, for it was too bright to look at, and the bird laid it in the old man's mouth. Then the birds stopped their singing and appeared to be very busy about the table. When they rose from it again, everything on the table that could be eaten or drunk had disappeared. These birds rose from their meal in their thousands and hundreds and carried away all the things that could not be eaten or drunk, such as bones, rinds, and shells, and took their flight back to the rising sun. But now, because they were not singing, the whir of their wings seemed to set the whole air a-tremble. And there was the table, pecked clean and empty, and the three old lords of Narnia still fast asleep. Now at last the old man turned to the travelers and bade them welcome. Sir, said Caspian, will you tell us how to undo the enchantment which holds these three Narnian lords asleep?
I will gladly tell you that, my son, said the old man. To break this enchantment, you must sail to the world's end, or as near as you can come to it, and you must come back having left at least one of your company behind.
And what must happen to that one? Asked Reepicheep.
He must go on into the utter east and never return into the world.
That is my heart's desire, said Reepicheep. And are we near the world's end now, sir? Asked Caspian. Have you any knowledge of the seas and lands further east than this?
I saw them long ago, said the old man, but it was from a great height. I cannot tell you such things as sailors need to know.
Do you mean you were flying in the air? Eustace blurted out.
I was a long way above the air, my son, replied the old man. I am Ramandu. But I see that you stare at one another and have not heard this name. And no wonder, for the days when I was a star had ceased long before any of you knew this world, and all the constellations have changed.
Golly, said Edmund under his breath. He's a retired star. Aren't you a star any longer? Asked Lucy.
I am a star at rest, my daughter, answered Ramandu. When I set for the last time, decrepit and old beyond all that you can reckon, I was carried to this island. I'm not so old now as I was then. Every morning a bird brings me a fireberry from the valleys in the sun, and each fireberry takes away a little of my age. When I have become as young as a children that was born yesterday, then I shall take my rising again, for we are at Earth's eastern rim, and once more tread the great dance.
In our world, said Eustace, a star is a huge ball of flaming gas.
Even in your world, my son, that is not what a star is, but only what it is made of. And in this world, you have already met a star, for I think you have been with Coriakin.
Is he a retired star too? Said Lucy.
Well, not quite the same, said Ramandu. It was not quite as a rest that he was set to govern the duffers. You might call it a punishment. He might have shone for thousands of years more in the southern winter sky if all had gone well.
What did he do, sir? Asked Caspian.
My son, said Ramandu, it is not for you, a son of Adam, to know what faults a star can commit. But come, we waste time in such talk. Are you yet resolved? Will you sail further east and come again, leaving one to return no more, and so break the enchantment? Or will you sail westward?
Surely, sire, said Reepicheep, there is no question about that. It is very plainly part of our quest to rescue these three lords from enchantment. I think the same, Reepicheep, replied Caspian. And even if it were not so, it would break my heart not to go as near the world's end as the Dawn Treader will take us. But I am thinking of the crew. They signed on to seek the seven lords, not to reach the rim of the earth. If we sail east from here, we sail to find the edge, the utter east, and no one knows how far it is. They're brave fellows, but I see signs that some of them are weary of the voyage and long to have our prow pointing to Narnia. I don't think I should take them further without their knowledge and consent. And then there's the poor Lord Roop. He's a broken man.
My son, said the star, it would be no use, even though you wished it, to sail to the world's end with men unwilling or men deceived. That is not how great unenchantments are achieved. They must know where they go and why. But who is this broken man you speak of?
Caspian told Ramandu the story of Roop.
I can give him what he needs most, said Ramandu. In this island there is sleep without stint or measure, and sleep in which no faintest footfall of a dream was ever heard. Let him sit beside these other three and drink oblivion till your return.
Oh, let's do that, said Lucy. I'm sure it's just what he would love. At that moment, they were interrupted by the sound of many feet and voices. Drinian and the rest of the ship's company were approaching. They halted in surprise when they saw Ramandu and his daughter, and then, because these were obviously great people, every man uncovered his head. Some sailors eyed the empty dishes and flagons on the table with regret. My lord, said the king to Drinian, pray send 2 men back to the Dawn Treader with a message to the Lord Roop. Tell him that the last of his old shipmates are here asleep without dreams, and that he can share it. When this had been done, Caspian told the rest to sit down and lay the whole situation before them. When he had finished, there was a long silence and some whispering until presently the master bowman got to his feet and said,
What some of us have been wanting to ask for a long time, Your Majesty, is how we're ever to get home when we do turn, whether we turn here or somewhere else. It's been west and northwest winds all the way, barring an occasional calm. And if that doesn't change, I'd like to know what hopes we have of seeing Narnia again. There's not much chance of supplies lasting while we row all that way. That's landsman talk, said Drinian. There's always a prevailing west wind in these seas all through the late summer, and it always changes after the new year. We'll have plenty of wind for sailing westward, more than we shall like from all accounts.
That's true, master, said an old sailor who was a Galmian by birth. You get some ugly weather rolling up from the east in January and February. And by your leave, sire, if I was in command of this ship, I'd say to winter here and begin the voyage home in March. What did you eat while you were wintering here? Asked Eustace.
This table, said Ramandu, will be filled with a king's feast every day at sunset.
Now you're talking, said several sailors. Your Majesties and gentlemen and ladies all, said Ranulph, there's just one thing I want to say. There's not one of us chaps as was pressed on this journey We're volunteers, and there's some here that are looking very hard at that table and thinking about king's feasts, who were talking very loud about adventures on the day we sailed from Cair Paravel, and swearing they wouldn't come home till we'd found the end of the world. And there were some standing on the quay who would have given all they had to come with us. It was thought a finer thing than to have a cabin boy's berth on the Dawn Treader than to wear a knight's belt. I don't know if you get the hang of what I'm saying, but what I mean is that I think chaps who set out like us will look as silly as those dufflepuds if we come home and say we got to the beginning of the world's end and hadn't the heart to go further. Some of the sailors cheered at this, but some said that was all very well. "This isn't going to be much fun," whispered Edmund to Caspian. "What are we to do if half those fellows hang back?" "Wait," Caspian whispered back. "I've still a card to play." "Aren't you going to say anything, Reap?" whispered Lucy. "No. Why should your majesty expect it?" answered Reepicheep in a voice that most people heard. "My own plans are made. While I can, I sail east in the Dawn Treader. When she fails me, I paddle east in my coracle. When she sinks, I shall swim east with my 4 paws. And when I can swim no longer, if I have not reached Aslan's country, or shot over the edge of the world in some vast cataract, I shall sink with my nose to the sunrise, and Peepasseek will be head of the talking mice in Narnia." "Hear, hear," said a sailor. "I'll say the same, barring the bit about the coracle, which wouldn't bear me." He added in a lower voice, "I'm not going to be outdone by a mouse." At this point, Caspian jumped to his feet. "Friends," he said, "I think you have not quite understood our purpose. You talk as if we had come to you with our hat in our hand, begging for shipmates. It isn't like that at all. We and our royal brother and sister and their kinsmen and Sir Reepicheep, the good knight, and the Lord Drinian have an errand to the world's edge. It is our pleasure to choose from among such of you as are willing, those whom we deem worthy of so high an enterprise. We have not said that any can come for the asking. That is why we shall now command the Lord Drinian and Master Rents to consider carefully what men among you are the hardest in battle, the most skilled seamen, the purest in blood, the most loyal to our person, and the cleanest of life and manners, and to give their names to us in a schedule." He paused and went on in a quicker voice. "Aslan's mane," he exclaimed. "Do you think that the privilege of seeing the last things is to be brought for a song? Why, every man that comes with us shall bequeath the title of the Dawn Treader to all his descendants, and when we land at Cair Paravel on the homeward voyage, he shall have either gold or land enough to make him rich all his life. Now scatter over the island, all of you. In half an hour's time, I shall receive the names that Lord Drinian brings me." There was rather a sheepish silence, and then the crew made their bows and moved away, one in this direction and one in that, but mostly in little knots or bunches, talking. "And now for the Lord Roop," said Caspian. But turning to the head of the table, he saw that Roop was already there. He had arrived, silent and unnoticed, while the discussion was going on, and was seated beside the Lord Argons. The daughter of Ramandu stood beside him as if she had just helped him into his chair. Ramandu stood behind him and laid both his hands on Roop's gray beard. Even in daylight, a faint silver light came from the hands of the star. There was a smile on Roop's haggard face. He held out one of his hands to Lucy and the other to Caspian. For a moment it looked as if he were going to say something. Then his smile brightened as if he were were feeling some delicious sensation. A long sigh of contentment came from his lips. His head fell forward, and he slept.
Poor Roop, said Lucy. I am glad. He must have had terrible times. Don't let's even think of it, said Eustace.
Meanwhile, Caspian's speech, helped perhaps by some magic of the island, was having just the effect he intended. A good many who had been anxious enough to get out of the voyage felt quite differently about being left out of it. And of course, whenever any one sailor announced that he had made up his mind to ask for permission to sail, the ones who hadn't said this felt that they were getting fewer and more uncomfortable. So that before the half hour was nearly over, several people were positively sucking up to Drinian and Rince. At least that was what they called it at my school, to get a good report. And soon there were only 3 left who didn't want to go, and those 3 were trying very hard to persuade others to stay with them. And very shortly after that, there was only 1 left. And in the end, he began to be afraid of being left behind all on his own and changed his mind. At the end of the half hour, they all came trooping back to Aslan's table and stood at one end while Drinian and Rince went and sat down with Caspian and made their report. And Caspian accepted all the men but that one who had changed his mind at the last moment. His name was Pittencream, and he stayed on the island of the star all the time the others were away looking for the world's end, and he very much wished he had gone with them. He wasn't the sort of man who could enjoy talking to Ramandu and Ramandu's daughter, nor they to him, and it rained a good deal. And though there was a wonderful feast on the table every night, he didn't very much enjoy it. He said it gave him the creeps sitting there alone, and in the rain as likely as not, with those 4 lords asleep at the end of the table. And when the others returned, he felt so out of things that he deserted on the voyage home at the Lone Islands and went and lived in Calderman, where he told wonderful stories about his adventures at the end of the world until at last he came to believe them himself. So you may say, in a sense, that he lived happily ever after, but he could never bear mice. That night, they all ate and drank together at the great table between the pillars where the feast was magically renewed, and the next morning, the dawn treader set sail once more, just when the great birds had come and gone again. Lady, said Caspian, I hope to speak with you again when I have broken the enchantments. And Ramandu's daughter looked at him and smiled